Hey everyone, welcome back to theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Again, that website is theclinicaltrialsguru.com. It's the best place on the internet for clinical trials information, we feel. And we feel that way because we bring on guests, what we call our guest gurus.
Yeah.
It's not because of us, it's because of people like our guest Selena. Selena Chavanis from Resolve Research Solutions in Canada, all the way in Canada, and she runs an SMO out there, and she's going to tell us a little bit about what SMOs are. We're going to talk about how clinical trials are being done in Canada, if there's any differences between the United States and Canada, and just kind of get a sense for the state of the industry a little bit, because we know a little bit about the States, but we don't always hear about Canada.
Yeah, and I think her last name was Chavan.
Chavan, Selena Chavan.
Yeah, Chavanez is the nice fancy version, but it's really just Chavan. Yeah.
Chavan, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So yeah, welcome, Selena. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be on.
Good.
Now tell us, just introduce yourself and your company.
Oh yeah, so as mentioned, my name is Selena Chavan, and I own Resolve Research Solutions Incorporated. It is a site management organization, but essentially we pride ourselves and market ourselves as being not so much the experts, but we could say experts for the purposes of this interview in the business of research. Mm-hmm. So we leave the expertise of seeing the patients, the medical aspects of research, the science to our scientists, but we allow our physicians who are part of our network to really look at the clinical research that they're doing, not as a supplement to their OHIP billing, which is what we call it here in Ontario. We have universal health care, so people are able to access the healthcare system without much cost. Let's use that very loosely. And so physicians usually run clinical research to supplement their income that they make through their practice. And it's usually, sometimes it's treated as much like a hobby. And when we go in, we really want them to understand that it's a business that they're running. So we try to make them understand the business of clinical research and how to properly execute a clinical trial from beginning to end, keeping in mind the high probability or the low probability or whatever probability there is of being inspected or audited. So keeping in mind that we have to follow certain regulations, there has to be appropriate training of the investigator and the staff, there has to be appropriate delegation, there has to be appropriate ethics approval. So those kind of things that we really make sure that they understand before getting involved in a clinical research program. And that's, of course, for beginners straight to investigators who have a lot of expertise.
Now, you mentioned the word networking with these medical offices and physicians, so that would set you in a position as an SMO, correct? Site management organization?
Site management organization,
okay.
Yeah. So we are an affiliate organization, so we don't actually own a physical site.
Okay.
We have affiliate doctors who work with us and allow us to manage their clinical research, but we don't actually own the facility.
So what your company would do is procure the studies, train the doctors and their staff on how to conduct the study, follow the protocol, and so forth. Am I correct?
That's correct, but we go a little bit above and beyond that. So we could do that for some of the more experienced sites that have a pretty established research infrastructure. Mm-hmm. But for our greener sites that are, maybe just starting into clinical research, we actually do everything. So once we got the clinical trial, we would help them with the pre-initiation activities. We'd negotiate the budget, we'd negotiate the contract, we will help them complete the regulatory and ethics documents. So really our aim is to alleviate the administrative burden that's associated with conducting a clinical trial.
So you do all the study startup?
All the study startup, we help them throughout the study. So if they have any questions, and we really help with the monitoring visits, which take up a lot of time, with the closeout visits, with data query and data locks and things like that. And we even go as far as archiving providing solutions for that. So we're really hands-on, and it depends on the physician. It depends on the site and their capacity to do the work.
Now, do you ever have issues where you may have a site that's underperforming as far as recruiting subjects for the study, where you have to go out and speak with the physician about increasing the enrollment?
Well, we really try to have a strategy right from the beginning for recruitment. Okay. I think it's important so some of our docs here have electronic medical records, and they think, oh, our feasibility is fine, we could just go in and pick the patients, and the recruitment is really highly correlated with the inclusion-exclusion criteria. So whereas a study may look very nice right at the beginning, oh yeah, I could do this, it's no problem. Once we take into consideration the inclusion-exclusion criteria, then it starts to get a little dicey, because the patient that we thought was the ideal patient now has these other comorbid conditions or exclusion criteria that we can't include them in the clinical study. So we have, sort of a marketing plan that we do right from the beginning that says, okay, what is our first target? Are we going to do social media? Are we going to send out an e-blast? Are we going to go to local hospitals? And it's dependent on the trial as well. Do you put out a radio ad for, a knee injury study?
Right.
It might not work. Putting up an ad in an emergency room, that might be a little bit more strategic.
Okay.
Now, Selena, what kind of studies do you guys do? What kind of medical indications are you guys doing studies for?
We do everything except for CNS and cancer.
Okay.
And that's particularly because most of the CNS neural-specific study, not mental health studies, but neural studies, are done in highly specialized centers. Oncology studies are done at hospitals. So for an SMO to break through the red tape of going into a hospital, they pretty much would have an established research infrastructure. They will have their local research ethics board or IRB. That takes forever.
Yeah, so we go through that it's that way with the universities here.
Yeah, so I mean, for me, it takes up a lot of time, and risk management, risk mitigation. For me, I want to get a trial, know that we could get it started up relatively quickly, get my docs working, get the patients in, and that sort of thing. Because for an SMO, the longer it takes to get that contract signed, the longer it takes for us to get some revenues generated.
Okay. Now let's say I'm an individual out there and I'm in the medical field. I've had some experience in research, but I want to start my SMO. Is there a lot of startup capital to get that going, or is it very little startup capital since you're going to be bringing on these physicians who already have their infrastructure set up?
So from my experience, there wasn't a lot of capital available when you have an SMO that is affiliated with research sites.
Okay.
However, if you are going to start up owning a site, then your venture capitalists are interested, because there are many different ways to generate revenue in that capacity. You could have your physicians who are obviously working their clinic, and then you have your research streams coming in, and you may have some other streams. So in that respect, they are a little bit more lenient, and a little bit their eyes have a little bit more gloss, so to speak, in them when they're speaking to you, because they realize that the return on investment for something that's more tangible is better than working with an affiliated site. So we didn't. When we started the company, we started looking at getting some investors. We realized that was a very, very difficult venture. So we stopped, and we realized that as part of our business plan, we realized that getting the customer, our investors will enable us, but getting the customers would actually allow our business to generate revenue and grow. So we really focused on the marketing aspect of it.
And when you say customers, just so the audience understands, who are you talking about?
I'm talking about primarily, at first we started looking at pharma, small to medium-sized pharmaceutical biotech companies. We didn't go after the big pharmaceutical companies because we went more targeted towards the CROs. Because generally big pharma gives the project management responsibilities to the CROs, and the CROs are contacting us. But so small to medium-sized pharma and biopharmaceuticals and CROs.
And you said something very interesting, that a lot of your CNS studies are done within the hospitals.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Sorry. I'm not going to answer that. I'm going to let my office answer that. Sorry. Yeah, so for example, a Parkinson's study or an Alzheimer's study would require a specialist, and the specialist would generally have the bulk of their practice coming outside of the hospital as opposed to their private practice. And generally for those types of studies, we will need some of the hospital infrastructure to conduct the study. So in that case, if we need to use part of the hospital, then we would have to go through hospital ethics and, again, hospital legal.
Yeah, a lot of red tape.
That is a lot of red. That could be another reason they're steering away from a lot of CNS there, because that's, for pharma, they want to, you know how it is, they want to get these studies up and running quick so they can get their data and get this medication on the market.
Yeah, well, I'm not saying that these types of studies don't happen here. I'm just saying that as an SMO, we won't be involved in recruiting doctors for those particular studies. Yeah. Because we just can't get into a hospital and say, well, you know, let an SMO sign the contract, and the hospital's going, well, why? Who are you guys, and why do we you?
Right. Now, Selena, a few more questions about Resolve, and then I want to get into the difference between trials in Canada and the U.S. Resolve Research, how long has this company been around?
We started it in 2004 and incorporated in 2005. So it's been around for about 8 years. Initially, very difficult to get it up and running. We generated like $432 in our first year. I just found the check stub the other day. Wow. Very difficult, but for all those people who are thinking, you know, oh, I'm not going to get involved in that, the first check that we received was the down payment to our house. So we were quite excited about persistence, and it does take persistence, because not only are you trying to get trials started, in the first year we had a pediatric epilepsy study. Like, talk about giving you the one that, you know, is going to be the hardest to recruit, and they needed a pediatric neuropsychologist. What the heck is that? You know, so it was a difficult recruit. It was difficult to get the sites. It was difficult to get the startup, and I really didn't know a lot about what I was doing.
Right.
You know? Because I started the company thinking that I was going to be a independent clinical research coordinator. And then this sort of happened, and it evolved into an SMO. Although I did my MBA, and my final project was developing a business plan for an SMO, I didn't know if I was going to get any pharmas knocking on my door. So I mean, after that first study, the rest was history. You learn very quickly how to negotiate a budget, very quickly to have legal look at your CTA, very quickly how to what documents need to be filled out and how to run this study. I had some experience doing it before starting the company, but when you're actually knee deep in it, you have to learn very quickly how to get it up and running.
Absolutely right.
It was a very successful study.
Now, how many sites are affiliated with Resolve?
We have about 25 sites.
Wow.
Here in the GTA. We also have a couple of sites in the U.S. that work with us. And, you know, we're trying to think about broadening our scope and our reach. But for me, I'm still very nervous about moving on to, you know, Asia or Brazil or something like that, because, you know, I'm very hands-on. I really want to make sure that my sites are as good on paper as they are physically. And that requires somebody on the ground. And so for me, it's very difficult to just say, well, let's just put up sites anywhere, have anybody affiliated with the network, because you have to do due diligence. And once your name is associated with a particular product, you don't want to damage the brand by just deciding that you're going to go off, you know, half-cocked doing, you know, at sites that are not properly or adequately resourced.
Well, and the other thing I think you deal with when you know, like the U.S. and Canada is interchangeable. I mean, United States and going to Canada, you really haven't really traveled anywhere. Right. Cultural wise, but when you start going to other countries, you not only just have the laws are different, but you have a difference in culture and how things are done and how people approach getting their job done, and you have to that can be a tough job.
That I definitely agree with you on that. There's the regulatory component, the ethics component, but you also have to deal with the quality component. You know, everybody could say that, yes, I want quality data, I recruit ethically, and, I'm not coercing any of my patients to participate. But
everybody says that.
Yeah. Well,
that's the rule.
We've had conversations with an individual in India, and what's normal for them, it would be an outrage here in the United States. And that's neither to say any one of us are wrong or right, but it's just that big of a contrast in how things are done. And, right. And that's how their culture is set up.
Right. Right. So for me to move into those territories, I'd really have to invest some time in understanding that said culture and knowing what the expectations are relative to my expectations versus their expectations, and how we manage that and meet somewhere in the middle. And I think that investment at this stage in the company is not the natural next step for me. Not right now, anyway.
And speaking of SMOs, we have a few viewers in India, actually, believe it or not, that have asked us questions about, hey, how do you start an SMO? And so I thought, well, let's ask Selena when we get her on. Going as specific as you want, I guess, can you start with what inspired you to create an SMO? And then just give the viewer a little bit of the most important things he needs to understand in creating his business plan.
Well, I think that's number one, create the plan. So you need to know, it's a very fragmented market. We know that. There's not a lot of SMOs. You can't say how much of the market share you're going to capture because it's so fragmented. So what you want to do is create the plan. Create the plan and say, are you going to focus on CNS? When we originally started, our entire focus was going to be on CNS clinical trials, believe it or not. Now we don't do them at all.
Right.
So you need to find out. So because my background was working in neurorehabilitation, was working on Alzheimer's studies, I thought that is a good place to start. That is what I know. So we created the plan based on the fact that we were going to do CNS studies. Then you would ask yourself, well, if I'm going to do CNS studies, how many can I do? How many can I recruit, or what do I have to recruit in order to be sustainable? And I'd say even one step before that, learn about the industry, learn exactly what is required, what the drug development process looks like, what would be some of the issues that the pharmas would have, that the CROs would have in terms of patient recruitment, meeting deadlines, meeting budget deadlines. What is fair market value for procedures done in your particular area versus other areas in the globe? You need to know that information. So once you develop your business plan, what is your 1-year goal? What is your 3-year or 5-year goal? And what's your 10-year goal? What are your short and long-term goals? So that way you could develop your marketing strategy. Well, if you're going to focus on CNS, or you're going to focus on diabetes, or whatever you're going to focus on, how do you focus on those therapeutic areas? And which pharmaceuticals or CROs do you target in terms of your marketing strategy? Basically, I targeted everybody because I knew that I wanted to focus on, after we got over the initial CNS hurdle, we wanted to focus on the business of clinical research. So I knew that I didn't necessarily have to know the therapeutic area per se. Right. I needed to know how to run the trial efficiently and effectively. So we developed a cost policy. We developed an advertising policy. We tracked our metrics in terms of, what the costs are for informed consent. What are the costs for, not necessarily procedural costs, not what a colonoscopy costs, because that you could get from your physician who actually knows those costs. But your physician might not necessarily know how to cost out their informed consent. How much time does that involve from your nurse or your coordinator? How much time does that involve from your physician? What are the costs associated with preparing the documents, explaining it to the patient? So it's not just necessarily that, you know, you're putting a $100 beside, you know, informed consent. What does that $100 mean? You know, so they'll have to have an idea of those kinds of points. Now, granted, when I started, I had no idea how to negotiate a budget. So is it something that you can learn as you go along based on the budget that the sponsor has given you? Certainly, but you need to know that you're going to get a budget and what it's going to look like, and which parts to start negotiating which and which parts not to, and what your overhead is and what your hospital administrative overhead is and what your physicians. So, you know, so there's a lot of interesting nuances that you would need to understand in order to get started. But first is having the plan. The plan is so important because it guides you. It will change, as mine did. I started off in CNS. I started off as an independent consultant. It evolved into an SMO. But then you need to know what the plan is and how to create your business through that plan, and know what you need to know that connects all of the pieces together.
Okay.
Yeah, that's for our viewer Vikas Turi. I mean, the guy's name is Vikas Turi in India. He's the guy who asked the question. So, Vikas, there's your answer. Go start your SMO.
You know, even better than that, you know, if you have a network of doctors and you're interested in looking to an SMO, contact us. We'll find some strategies for you.
Really? So the guy in India can actually contact you, and you'd be willing to...
We've had conversations. You see, one of the things that I think we have to learn as a human race is to whom much is given, much is expected. So, I mean, I've been very blessed and very fortunate to have mentors, to have people that, you know, I was able to talk to about my business. So, I mean, I've had Skype calls with individuals from India, individuals from the United States, people who call and say, can you help me just to, you know, let me know how to get started. Now, don't email me and ask me to email you a long script on it. It won't happen. You pick up the phone, you give me a call, I will talk to you.
Vikas, you're welcome. I'm glad I'm able to set this up. Definitely send Selena an email. Let's talk a little bit about business. Before we started the actual interview, we had an interesting mini conversation about the state of the industry right now in Canada. And I was mentioning that in the U.S. this year, for those of you watching in the future, it's 2012, we've seen a lot of work. I mean, this is the busiest I've seen it in a while. And you had slightly different experiences on your end over there. Can you kind of share a little bit about that?
Yeah, you know what? I'm actually just looking up what the C in CETA stands for. Anyhow, you know, we've been busy. I'm not saying that we haven't been busy. There's been things going on, but I think that one of the issues that is happening here in Canada right now is we are looking at the trade agreements that are existing in Europe and in other parts of the world, where patents for pharmaceutical drugs might be 2 years longer than a Canadian pharmaceutical could have. So whereas a European pharmaceutical may have 10 years on their patent, we have 8. And so that has a negative impact on pharmaceuticals deciding to set up shop here in Canada, and to not necessarily maybe to execute their trials here, but to set up here. And although it might not necessarily have an impact on if a trial comes to Canada, it has a negative impact on how Canada is viewed externally by the pharmaceutical industry. So, I mean, to say that I've seen some decreases in the number of trials here, certainly I could say that. And, you know, I contacted a colleague at RxND, which is a consortium of research companies here in Canada, and said, you know, how do I get on as being, you know, as being in agreement with this CETA initiative? And, she said, well, you'll have to contact various politicians, whatever. But it's something where it doesn't just affect big pharma. It affects all of the companies that feed into that engine.
It trickles down.
And I'm one of those recipients of, part of the work that big pharma generates, and that's the research and discovery end of the spectrum.
Now, are you responsible as the SMO for finding studies for your affiliates, or do they do that on their own and then approach you?
We find them. Resolve Research would go out and we very aggressively look for new studies, especially if we have a site that's part of our network. We are targeting, for our site in, say, Billings, Montana, we target asthma studies because that's what they want. For our site right down the road here in Oshawa, Ontario, we target GI type studies. Our pediatricians are looking for vaccine studies, pediatric studies. Mm-hmm. We're very specific. We have one general practitioner in our network that we work with. GPs are generally not the easiest group to work with, let's say.
Really?
Wow. They seem to be a mixed bag. So we have one that we work with that has a great space, that looks like, that's a very good site to work with. So with them, we look for more of the diabetes studies, the more generic studies I could do, but we generally tend to specialize in targeting studies of specific therapeutic areas for our docs.
Interesting. And then you're also in charge of managing the budgets and things like that for each of your affiliates.
Yeah. Well, if you're good at it, they let you do it.
Right. And myself and Don, we had and this is interesting for our viewers, we had a conversation the other day about the hidden cost of doing research, because clinical trials have changed so much just over the last 5 years. So now, budgets have gotten smaller, and the sponsors are actually asking us to do more things. And a lot of sites get caught up in not knowing how to negotiate well. In the CNS space, we've seen a lot of this centralized ratings where we used to do it in-house, but now there's someone back east that's doing something maybe via Skype. And so we still have to pay our doctor to be here even though she's not doing anything because something's going on. So, and these are costs that are usually not in the budget. So if you don't know what you're doing, for lack of a better word, you can get screwed very easily.
Well, definitely reading the protocol. Whenever I get a study, I'm sorry?
I said, who wants to do that, Selena?
Yeah, well, you know what? It's important because you see a lot of these hidden procedures. So whenever I get a study, I immediately open up an Excel spreadsheet and start plugging in those numbers as I'm reading through.
You sound like Don. You sound like this guy right here.
Every single study gets an Excel spreadsheet attached to it with a mock-up version. And you know what? A lot of what I find in some of the studies that I've experienced is the overhead is usually quite low, and they don't put in a fee for the investigator and the coordinator to do their job. So, okay, they do all the procedures, and then what are they supposed to do? Nothing? Well, who's going to transcribe the information from the source to the CRF? Who's doing all of this extra stuff that needs to happen? We don't just, do a physical and that's it.
Right.
The procedures that are not documented in the protocol that are required to happen in order for there to be due diligence, somebody has to pay for that. And I find those areas and startup costs, oh, for heaven's sakes, like don't get me started on startup costs, archiving costs, legal costs. They give us a startup budget and it's supposed to be, all that we are able to work with. And there's been some studies that we've said, sorry, we can't do it. And I think that's where, sites need to be a little bit more, diligent and saying, if you're not going to pay you for the time that you're devoting to doing this study, then how do they expect the sites to do it properly? And according to regulations, and not even above regulations, is the patient safety. We don't want to be whipping through these patients, doing these procedures on a whim. You need to take some time and get them done properly, right. Especially when you're considering pediatric or baby studies, where I've had one ethics committee reject our budget. And I went to them and I said, look, this is where if you have a cost policy, you're not just talking about a number that's on a piece of paper. You're talking about a number that has been quantified and correlated with various tasks. So when they say this budget is too high for this particular study, I say, look, we are working with babies. So whereas the procedure might be something that doesn't cost very much, to extract some conjunctivitis out of a baby's eye or to do a blood draw on a baby is not something that's going to take 5 minutes. So therein lies, the knowledge about this study, the knowledge about the protocol, the knowledge about what the doctor actually has to be doing to the child or the adult or whatever in between that says, this is why the cost is what it is.
Right.
Getting approval on that budget.
Very, very good information.
Yeah, it sounds like what this guy Don does, which is we're so lucky to have him here at South Coast because every protocol we get, he opens up Excel and just plugs in the numbers. I wanted to get a little...
Can I just say one more thing? I think that's one. Some of our doctors in our hospitals here that we work with hire Resolve Research to do the study startup, so the regulatory, ethics, and negotiate the budgets.
And nothing
we can't get into the hospitals to actually do the physical work, but they will hire us out to do that component because that component requires some kind of thought as to what goes into some of these other costs. Again, the procedural costs like the ECG and the colonoscopy and that sort of thing, that comes from the hospitals, whatever fee structure they have. But some of these other costs is where they would like some expertise, somebody who has some metrics on it to say, this is why these costs need to be so high or, lower or whatever.
Right. Now, what would be a good overhead percentage, I guess, for a typical site?
Why are you putting me on the spot?
People want to know. We got an expert on.
Okay, so this is where it's a little tricky. Again, in our cost policy, if it's any site that's outside of the Greater Toronto Area, we could charge between 25 to 30%. Let's say 20 even. Okay. 20 to 30%. It depends on where you are. Now, if you are in the Greater Toronto Area where you're paying higher cost of rent, higher cost of electricity, higher cost for this, higher cost for that, then we're talking about a 30 to 40% institutional overhead.
Yeah, and I asked because there's some sites out there, and I know they're in high rent areas, and they're afraid to ask for more. They see maybe 10% of what they're given in the budget, and then they say, well, I mean, I'll go with this, but really, my costs are a lot higher.
Why would you go for that? That's where you say, we need 40% because our costs are 40. These are fixed costs.
Right.
This is what it's going to cost us. So if your rent and your electricity and your all of the stuff that you can't do the clinical trial in a vacuum, you can't do it out on the sidewalk.
Right.
You got to do it in some kind of infrastructure that you've paid for and you've rented and you own or whatever, and you have to pay bills for.
Right.
Overhead.
I agree with you, and I think it also lets pharma know the realistic figures of really conducting that study.
Absolutely.
Because what happens sometimes too is that if you don't negotiate enough money, it also becomes not as important as getting that study done, and you're just always looking for the study that's going to pay more. So you neglect getting that study done, and the sponsors run into problems, and it can actually backfire on you too, because then they look at you as someone that's not a good enroller for that study, so maybe they don't want to come back to you.
Well, I hate to say it, but doing research for the greater good, that's great. That's what we do it for. But from a business perspective, you're looking for your return on the investment. If you are investing into doing this, conducting this clinical study and doing the research and investing in resources, your time, your staff time, your time, you want to know that you get some kind of return. And if the return is less than what you could typically do seeing your patients on a regular day, then what is the value add? And I mean, I don't want to sound like it's all about the money, but it's all about the money.
Yeah, and it's important for people to understand that.
If it's a business, it has to be.
Even in a university, if you're conducting that in a university, it still comes down to the dollar bill, because university, they also distribute that money to pay for different departments. They have to pay for staff, and they're also going to want to see some sort of residual left over as well, so that they have that money there to pay for other future things coming up.
Right.
So
if your research ends up costing you, so there is no return, or it's just, it evens out.
There's no incentive. Yeah. No, I agree with you.
I'm not sure. Unless you're totally philanthropic and they're doing that for those reasons, then
there's a few groups, but most research now is done in the private sector. And yeah, I mean, it's important that we agree on the importance of making a profit, or else you're not going to be around for long.
No.
Well, some groups are, as you said, some groups do that and are nonprofit, and that's fine. But for me, as an SMO, as a person who is looking to the business of research, I need to be sure that I generate revenue for my sites. And if I'm not generating revenue for my sites, meaning making a profit, then I'm not doing my job, unfortunately. And that's the job that I've chosen to do. That's the job that I love.
And I'm going to make a comment, so I hope some people out there don't take this the wrong way, but also, too, when you are looking at it from the perspective that we're referring to, you have a tendency to make sure that the quality is there and that you get it done on time, because if not, you don't get paid, and you cannot pay your staff, you cannot pay your bills.
Well, of course, because, I mean, in every contract it says that your payment is contingent upon there not being any protocol violations or deviations or anything else. So if we are, it's all about the money and we're rushing through, again, we are cutting ourselves off at the knees. So again, this is where an SMO like mine allows the physician to concentrate on the medical aspect of his work, and I concentrate on making sure that he's being paid fair, that he's able to do the work that is set out in the protocol according to fair market value. So, I mean, that's where, some of our newest to our most experienced physicians or PIs say, you are a value add because you allow us to generate the revenue. We could go in and look for the most appropriate patient. We could be, recruiting as opposed to filling out forms.
I think that was a very valuable line of statements you just gave. Yeah.
Speaking of line of statements, you like that segue, Don?
Yes.
Yeah.
We have a guru profile page on our site. Okay, this is a shameless plug, but Selena is she's actually a producer of this show. The first 100 people to sign up, put their profile on there. It's only $99 a year. I mean, you can spend more per year on Starbucks easily.
Right?
Easily. Maybe in a month.
You'll spend that
maybe in a month.
In a month.
We'll spend that in a month.
I will spend that in a month.
I buy my wife coffee every day, so I know.
I could spend that on martinis very easy.
In one night. A few drinks. Yeah. I mean, so $99 a year, you get a profile on our page. What does that give you? Well, it gives you an interview if you want. If you're camera shy, you don't have to. Gives you links to your site. Gives you exposure. People go on Google, search clinical trials. We're on the top 2 pages. They're going to click on our thing. You get mentioned in every video. What else? You get the links to your site. So this is $99 per month. The first 100 people sign up get producer credit. So you get another extra plug right there. And we thank Selena for doing that. We thank Sarah Siegler for doing it. And we want to encourage more of you to do it, because gas prices are through the roof. And Don and I, speaking of budgets, actually need to drive to the clinics. That's not free, right? How many miles do you drive, Don?
Oh, you don't want to know.
Tell them.
I think it's about 68 miles.
One way.
Gracious.
Yeah,
One way.
that's one way.
So it's actually 140 miles.
Yeah.
So with
So one
gas
of
at
the reasons I
420
did sign up was I thought it was great value for the 99. I thought, I could do this. And I canceled a couple of videos because I was feeling kind of camera shy, but I thought, what the heck, I'll do it today.
You've been doing such an excellent job. So
You did great. You've been a great sport. You answered it very
you.
real world questions. We don't just throw softball pitches and then let you hit it out of the park.
Yeah, I kind of got that when you were asking specifics.
Well, but people like that, Selena, because otherwise people are not going to watch it. So now people are going to watch it and say, hey, maybe I'm going to call Selena. Like that guy in India, he's going to see that you know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, I'll leave off a couple of things. I don't know. Are we wrapping up right now, guys?
We're wrapping up, but you have as much time as you want.
No, but I just wanted to say to anybody who's looking to start, well, first of all, if you're not starting, you're a physician out there who's looking for an SMO and you think maybe I don't need one, well, exactly what I said. If you want to concentrate on the medical aspect of clinical research and leave all the administration to someone else, then contact an SMO. Preferably a contact mine, but contact an SMO because they are a real value add. Mm-hmm. For people who are looking to start an SMO or to start, let's say, a company in general, know that within the first year, you're not going to be generating huge sums of money and driving a big car and having a lot of bling. That's not realistic. But stick with it if you know that you have a proper business plan and you, if you're very passionate about research and passionate about business as I am, I think you could do really well in this industry. I've been doing it for 7-8 years. I have no regrets. I'm not ever planning on stopping because I love it so much. The only additional thing that I do is research consulting, which I think is another revenue stream, but it's still correlated to the business. So try to think a little bit outside the box as to how you can generate additional revenue streams by having your core business being as an SMO, but supplement that by, talking or consulting on different issues. And one of the things that we didn't get to was our marketing strategy. I think that that's very important. We didn't have huge marketing dollars to market Resolve Research. So one of the things that we did in the early days was we did a small research study on, minorities in clinical research. We spoke about it at the DIA in Atlanta in 2007. So we were invited. We just had to pay for our plane and hotel. And so, you're letting somebody else pay for your advertising because you're mentioned in all of their materials, but you don't have to pay for it yourself.
Right.
We spoke about it at the DIA in Ottawa. We wrote letters to the editor in clinical trials magazines. And so marketing is very important. Building the brand is very important. Making sure that your brand is synonymous with quality and integrity, especially in this industry where we are so incestual. You meet one person and they're working for one pharma. Next week they're working for another, and you're interacting with them. So that would be my sort of takeaway message.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, if you want to join an SMO, if you're a physician or a site out there and you're not doing well, contact Selena. She obviously knows what she's doing. After watching this interview, if you don't contact her, I don't know what's wrong with you. And if you're trying to start an SMO, I wouldn't do it because she would probably crush you. In all seriousness, she's gonna offer advice and help you out. I would offer advice. You're very reachable. You're on Twitter, right?
I'm on Twitter at Resolve Research, resolveresearch.com. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not on Facebook because it started getting so distracting that I just thought, forget it. I'm getting off of here. But I'm feeling urged to go back because my daughter turns 13 on the weekend and she's been asking me for one. So if she goes on, you'll know that I'll go back on. But that's about it.
Well, there you go. And Selena, Resolve Research Solutions, we thank you very much.
Thank you, Selena.
Thank you.
You're welcome back on anytime. We'll get a specific topic and we'll spend maybe half an hour to 45 minutes on it. And
Yep.
it's clear that you know a lot about the business behind clinical trials. So I imagine our next interview will focus even more on that topic.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, guys, and
Thank you,
goodbye
Selena.
to the world. Thank you.
Thank you. This is